Good morning, all. It is May 1st today, and we get to head into Judges chapter 13 through 14:20 here. And it's a fairly substantial portion of the book of Judges. And of course, it's the story of Samson. And I think every time I read this story, it gets a little bit weirder for me. And this time, when I was looking at it, it's pretty amazing to me, actually, that there's a full chapter dedicated to Samson's parents, even before Samson is born. It's the story of how his mother and father, Manoah, and what's the wife's name? I don't know that her name is given in here. It just was Manoah and his wife. But it does tell us that they are Danites, which I think is an interesting detail for us. We're going to see in a couple of chapters that the Danites are unable to drive out the Philistines who are part of their territory. And so they go looking for another place to set themselves up outside of the inheritance that have been given to them by the Lord. I think this is a terrible decision that they make, and in the midst of that terrible decision, they do another terrible thing by grabbing a priest from a private household on their way up to Dan to conquer that place, and they kidnap this priest and make him the priest for their own whole tribe, and they enter into idolatry, worshiping the Lord as they've kind of determined to see fit on their own. And so if we're a careful audience reading this, we can see that there's a descending into chaos and idolatry on the part of the Danites. But this is a detail mentioned in the story to begin Samson's narrative. And what I also think is interesting is that here you have the angel come not once but twice to talk to Samson's parents, and they're asking him questions about how they should bring up this young man. I think they're excited about the fact that he is going to be a Nazarite, and they get instructions on how to do that for him from birth to death. He's going to be a Nazarite. But what I find interesting, I think, in the whole thing is that not everybody who has an angel talk to them in Scripture actually ends up successful as God's deemed success. In fact, I haven't gone through and done a study on it, but it seems like actually relatively few of those who have an angel actually speak to them then do what the angel tells them to do and live a godly life. I think about Solomon in particular has God appear to him himself two times, and Solomon goes off the rails. There are others, of course, who have God speak to them and still are not successful. And I wonder what that is about us humans, that even something as overwhelming as God or an angel speaking to us sometimes isn't enough to cause us to want to live obedient lives. You'd think that an interaction with the transcendent would give you an eternal perspective on your life in general, but it doesn't seem to always do that. So, something I looked at here in that first chapter about Samson's parents that I thought was really interesting. Also, it seems like there's a disconnect between chapter 13 and the beginning of chapter 14. It almost feels like there's something missing between chapter 13 and 14. When we get to the end of 13, Samuel isn't even born, or sorry, Samson isn't even born yet. And then in chapter 14, he's already asking for a wife from among the Philistines. Fast forward in his life, but it certainly isn't an uphill trajectory for him. It seems to be the story of disobedience even from a young age, although God is using his disobedience for his purpose here. So, a confusing story, an interesting story, but I hope you'll enjoy reading that and maybe seeing it maybe differently than I do.